I have the great privilege of working with an extraordinary staff, Lena Nealon and others, with this project, Demand Abolition, which is a program of our Foundation on Alternatives Fund. And through the fund, in earlier years, say 30 years ago, my sister Helen, who's here, and I were working on issues like working with the mentally ill, working with homeless, working with children who were sexually exploited or dropouts from schools. And at some point, after working with refugees later as ambassador, and seeing what was happening in Eastern Europe right after the fall of the wall, with the implosion of communism, this huge number of women who were being brought over to the West. We, in the policy community, started calling that trafficking, because we knew about drug trafficking and we knew about gun trafficking. And so this idea emerged that these desperate women were being brought across borders. And that was the problem. And that word trafficking came to be a shorthand for the exploitation of women and girls and boys that had actually been going on for centuries. It's just that we focused on it with that fall of the wall in Eastern Europe. But when I came back after being ambassador, and our foundation said, well, let's start working on this particular issue, we decided, because we know a lot about working internationally and how difficult that is, we said, well, why don't we focus just on the United States? Because we'd looked at Sweden, we'd looked at Norway, where they had reduced prostitution by 80%, for example, in Sweden over a 10-year period. And we said, how did they do that? You know, in terms of their street prostitution, but then going on the internet also. Just how did they do that? Because maybe we could do something like that for the United States. We, meaning the United States, could do something like that. Well, it turns out it wasn't by rescuing more and more of the girls and the women. And I use the word girls to actually mean girls when I say that. I actually mean girls. I mean underage, because you all know that the average age in which a female in the United States it hits the streets, if you will, as a prostituted person is about 13 or 14. So at any point in time, there are a large number of girls out there. So the people who were really doing hard work, the Lord's work in rescuing the women and girls, found that there were just more, and there were more, and there were more. And we started saying, well, how do you get upstream from that? And how did Sweden do it? You know, like, what's their secret? And it turns out that Sweden, which you think of as very sort of loose in terms of sexuality and all of that, Sweden had decided they were going to stop the buyers. They said there is a market dynamic here. There is supply of bodies, there is demand of those bodies, and there's a distribution system. And those are called pimps, or they're called traffickers. Now, if you think about which is more amenable to change, right? The supply depends on, are there females who are vulnerable? A pimp told an FBI agent who told me, I go to a mall, I look for a girl who's walking around by herself. Well, why is that? The women in this room know that, in fact, girls don't go to malls and walk around by themselves. That's a social thing we do with other girls. So I look for one who's walking by herself, and I say to her, you know, you have beautiful eyes. And if she looks me back in the eye and she says, thank you, I just keep going. And I go to the next one and I say, you have beautiful eyes. And if she looks at her feet and says, no, I don't, He said, I know I've got her. So, will there continue to be that supply? Yes, yes there will. Of very vulnerable 13-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 9-year-olds. If 13 or 14 is the average, that means for every 16-year-old you've got a 12-year-old or an 11-year-old. So let's keep that in mind. And they are very vulnerable when they've run away, especially from a family where they were being raped. So, and that will continue, we know. So, okay, so we got the supply, got distribution. Let's just go after the pimps. Oh, there are people in this room who've told me what it's like to build a case, work on that case for months. And these guys are so wealthy. They can afford any defense lawyer in the world because they make about $250,000 for every one of the women or girls that they're pimping. So that's a very, very tough endeavor. Well, maybe we could stop the demand. No, that won't work either. Because boys will be boys, and so you can't stop the buyers, you know, they've been doing it for millennia. So let's go back, you're gonna stop the supply, no. Distribution, no. Demand, well, I remember, do you? Late 70s, early 80s, when we first started thinking about domestic violence. Boys will be boys. And we talked to the police who said that's a family affair, we can't interfere. And then a bunch of us said, well, we're gonna start shelters. And we worked and worked and worked on getting more and more and more and more shelters for battered women without stopping to think, hey, how come they're leaving their homes? We're like, what's wrong with this picture? So it took this real cultural shift for us to say, no, the women aren't the ones who should be suffering more by losing their homes. It's the perpetrators, it's the guys who are the problem here. Let's pass some laws so the police don't have to have a woman sign a complaint when she's got a split lip and bruises, and the police come in and they see this guy who's very, very agitated. Why put the burden on her when he's just said, if you squeal, I'm going to come back for the children? Like, why would you do that, right? But it took this whole turnaround. Well, that's where we are. We are at a turnaround point. We have a social movement going, and many of the people in this room are in that first 5% of this social movement. It is a very, very exciting time for people who are going, many of you are going to be the people who will stop this abuse, Linda, that you're talking about. And may I say one more thing, that stopping the abuse, of course, it's the right thing to do for the women and girls. No question about how damaging, how very, very damaging it is to them. But it's also bad for the guys. It is really bad for guys for a lot of reasons. It's bad that they have to dissociate, that they have to have this secret life, it's bad in a lot of ways. We do research on them. They say they feel dirty after they've been, after they've bought someone's body. They say they don't, they don't feel as good about themselves afterwards. But the other thing is they lose their marriages a lot because these are average. The average John, if you will, is white, middle class, married with children and living in the suburbs. Now, Johns are in every social stratum. I'm not saying that that's all, but that is your average profile. So it's bad for her, it's bad for him, and you know what else? It's bad for all of us. It's really bad for us as a society. There is a coarsening of culture that happens when we allow this kind of degradation. So huge thanks to each one of you. I'm going to say the obvious. I have the privilege of knowing quite a few survivors at this point, and you'll hear from some today. We should never have a meeting without the experts. And the experts, the highest experts, are the survivors. I actually don't think I know any traffickers or any pimps. I know a lot of Johns. Statistics are it's 14% of the male population. So for every 100 men I know, there are 14 who are buyers. And for you all, they were at your Thanksgiving table. And you sat next to, you sat in the pew right behind them at church. It's your rabbi. It's the guy who's in your class, in your humanities class. You think about, these are horrible people. They're not usually horrible people. There are some really horrible people among them. It is so much part of the culture that it is, it's something we don't want to think about. You just don't want to think about the fact that the lawyer who helped you with your will is a buyer. You just don't want to go there. And so he's not going to tell you, and you're not going to know, but when you do the research, that's how it comes out. All right, now, was that too much of a downer? No. Okay. We'll lift it up. We'll lift it up because I get to introduce one of my heroes. This is Marianne Hatchet.
Hi.
And I think I'll introduce you all right before I ask you to say a few words. So the general format is I'd like for each one of the people up here to say some words about what you're doing, just in a nugget, after I introduce you, and then we'll have some discussion time, and then we'll ask you for your ideas, your thoughts, your questions, etc. And then we're going to close hearing from a particularly insightful Dallasite here, Bliss. All right, so Marianne Hatchet, Cook County Sheriff's Office, that's up in Chicago, and she's been there for 9 years. I'm just choosing a few things here and there, the things that I like the best. Okay. I love what she has done on what's called the National Day of John's Arrest, so I'm gonna sort of push you in that direction to talk about that. But what she has learned is about targeting the buyers. And she's really one of the national experts. We brought her down to testify when Colorado was trying to get a bill through, which they succeeded in. She testified to the State House, then to the State Senate, 2 different trips. And then, she's now, she testified in Illinois. She's in tremendous demand now as an expert around. And before that, she had worked for 3 major corporations. Marianne, take 5 minutes. I hate to say 5 minutes, but take 5 minutes because you're going to get to talk some more after that. Okay?
Well, first and foremost, I'm not really sure when I became a national expert.
When I said it.
That's what it was. I've been waiting. That's what I needed to know. And so now I can say that Ambassador Swanee Hunt has knighted me as such. I want to also tell you that I am a survivor as well. And we'll talk more about that later. But because she nudged me, she already gave me my direction. One of my very, very, very pleasing moments in life was when many research moments, many venues, many projects, many coming togethers, as it were, culminated in this National Day of John's Arrest idea. Sheriff Dart said, go do it. And so we had our pilot in 2012, Columbus Day pilot, with I believe 8 jurisdictions. And we, as a collaborative, we brought in LAPD, Las Vegas, just name a few, Las Vegas PD, some local partners of ours as well. You're going to have to speak quite a bit louder because the PA isn't picking up as well.
Oh, okay. May I hold it? Oh yeah, you could.
Okay. Is that okay? That better? Okay. So Las Vegas, Phoenix.
I think you should start back a few seconds.
Go back? Oh, okay. Well, we want to make sure that everybody that was a part of the Columbus Day pilot is kind of noted because it started this huge movement in law enforcement. The idea was that each area, each jurisdiction would do what they normally do if they were executing any buyer activity. Of course, you have to have a statute to enforce it and all that, but we had Elgin, Illinois, Aurora, Illinois, Cincinnati was part of the beginning, Newport News, Virginia. And so what ended up happening was, as a collaboration, we arrested 216 Johns.
In what period of time?
That was a 4-day, Commander, 4 days? 4 days. 4-day period was the Columbus Day pilot. Since then, we've had 5 sting operations. It's grown to 13 states and over 20 jurisdictions, including Homeland Security and the FBI, because we have done a really cool one last year, the Super Bowl in Indianapolis, they joined us. But now we have really, actually, in the last 6 weeks, picked up about 18 to 20 more jurisdictions that will participate in the next one whenever we decide to do that. We can't tell you when, though.
And you picked them up being here in Dallas?
Yes.
Right at the conference, am I right? Mm-hmm. Sergeant, that you helped organize?
Conference on Crimes Against Women.
Yeah, so that's cool.
It's very cool, and that's kind of how this whole thing really works, which is Swanee has us go somewhere, we sit down in a room with a wonderful group of people like you, and then we get to talk, and my particular pitch is, like when I met with Sergeant Fawcett last month, will you join us? He said, absolutely. Well, also, other people were around, and so we've pulled in quite a few. Minnesota was here. We grabbed them. They got a task force that's joining us, Minneapolis, St. Paul. So it's a growing law enforcement movement to just bring us together as law enforcement. I do have the pleasure of working for law enforcement as a survivor, but to be able to be empowered to actually, I think it's very poetic, don't you? To be able to be the person who was victimized by the buyers, to be able to be the person coordinating, and we have arrested in 5 sting operations nationally 1,150 Johns. So yeah, we're pretty proud of that. There's a lot of other type of charges that are involved, of course, narcotics and guns, and we've towed over 400 vehicles, close to 500 vehicles. There's fines and penalties attached depending on where you are. But most importantly, we're trying to bring awareness within the law enforcement community, support each other. Some areas weren't doing it, some areas were doing it, but they were almost about to lose their vice units because other gang activity or whatever was going on, guns are becoming an issue. We've actually helped a few units stay intact because of the national attention that this has gotten. I'm not sure if we've ever talked about that, but we're really glad about that as well. Everybody's doing their own normal operations, and sometimes this isn't a priority because it does cost a bit more. You do reverse stings. They get very creative.
Explain what a reverse sting or sting is.
A reverse sting operation is where undercover female officers, either on the street or internet, we set up the date, as it were, set up the purchasing of sex, and then make the arrest when the buyer shows up in whatever, whether it be on the street or an internet. Sometimes it's a hotel, sometimes it's some on the East Coast, they've actually rented a house and they just kind of scoop them up, take them out the back as they show up thinking they're about to engage in an illegal sex act. So we don't dictate or direct how the agency or jurisdiction executes their operations. They do their normal operations, but what we do is come together and with support from Demand Abolition, send out a media release. We have collective numbers, collaborative numbers that strengthen everybody's work. And we've rescued a number of minors, different jurisdictions, Boston and Las Vegas, a number of survivors of some horrific experiences as well. All types of things, kidnapping charges, we have the whole gamut. We seize weapons, we seize cash, we seize other paraphernalia and different things that are associated with criminal activity as well.
Hey, could I add something here? People usually are really, really surprised to learn that in the United States, the ratio between how many guys are picked up compared to how many of the women and girls, if you will. And sure, there are boys, okay? If you'll forgive me, the boys are in such a smaller percentage that I'm going to say women and girls. the proportion nationwide is, 8 or 10 of the women and girls for every one guy. Now, let's for round numbers say it's 10. She has been with at least 10 guys. So they picked up one man and 99 went free. And to get her, they had to watch guys come and go, right? Because that's the evidence.
Exactly.
So we got a big opportunity, I started to say problem, a great opportunity in terms of this law enforcement piece that Marianne is coordinating for Sheriff Dart in Cook County up in Chicago. Mm-hmm. Right? So now I think this is a good segue to Sergeant Byron Fassett. Many of you know him here. He's been with the Dallas Police for 29 years. And as you can imagine, there are an awful lot of things I could say about him in the course of that time. Right now, he's supervising the Child Exploitation Squad. He's got 1,100 cases a year, 15 detectives. They're working on child abductions, child pornography, victimization through prostitution, sexual assaults, other kinds of sexual abuse. But he is one of the original planners of this annual Crimes Against Children conference. And I would love your thoughts about what Marianne has said, what I've said, or just speaking out of your own experience, wherever you want to go with it.
Oh, absolutely. And I got to apologize, I keep rubbing mine. I was playing with my wonderful, beautiful little granddaughter last night, and she threw sand in my face. And so my eyes, I can't even see on my eye now. Sweet little girl that she is. But yeah, I actually, as I listened to your comments, Ms. Hunt, I was listening to you talk about this, and I always keep looking back how we're developed. And what I'll do is take it real quickly from a community, which I think the department is part of. Our department that didn't see this necessarily as an issue, to a organization, a community, and a city, and now I believe a country that clearly sees it. And I think it's a lot of things coming together. I get a lot of credit, and it's actually a lot of people around me. And actually, my roots on this, what I drew on a lot was I started a domestic violence unit. And so I had to really draw on that because you're affecting change. It's taken that experience, my experience as a male, my experience as a police officer. I was fortunate enough to work in the AMBER program with people like Phil Keith and several other people within that organization who were able to take that experience on developing policy, strategies, and affecting change. And I remember one of the things that was told in a meeting with Amber one time is, to affect change, you got to understand, and I think that's what we as a community, as a country have to understand, we are turning a ship around in a very small creek, and it takes time and it takes patience, and I'm not a patient person. So, with that being said, that's how the high-risk victims model started. We've always dealt with victimization of children through prostitution. And it became obvious to us that our response was inadequate at best. And so we started working with the different groups and really trying to affect change. And our model now is a comprehensive model that focuses on identifying and locating victims and holding all perpetrators of those victims accountable. But with everything, you have to have a starting point and an ending point. And thankfully, we're not at an ending point. Our starting point was identifying and locating victims. We learned how to find kids, but as with everything else, when you find the victims, we realized we didn't understand our victims. So we had to understand dynamics, but then we didn't know how to talk to them, so we developed the interview model. We learned how to find kids, we learned how to talk to victims, but how do you hold the exploiters accountable? And so we developed investigative models, and we're very proud within the city of Dallas, Dallas County, and state of Texas, and federally that we get very long sentences on those people who perpetrate against women and children because of the investigative models that we developed. And so we had all that, and we were doing, if I may say so myself, a very, very good job. We went from only identifying maybe 10 to 15 girls a year that were only by vice arrest, to now identifying 150 to 200 girls a year, women and children, and only a small percentage, less than 10%, are from vice arrest. And majority of them are from the education we provided to the Dallas officers who are finding these children. They're not arresting them. They're not even arresting adult women. They find them in situations. They realize their exploitation because of education. They know who to contact. And then through what I would call therapeutic interviewing, we're able to elicit information, because what we tell everybody, if you can't identify victimization, you can't get help. If you can't identify victimization, you can't get services. If you can't identify victimization, you can't find perpetrators. And we went from, again, 10, 11, 12, 15 being arrested to now 150 to 200 victims identified every year, with only about 10% from arrest, the other from other means of identifying, locating. And we were doing a very good job. And then we decided, and we started looking at this, and this thing, the internet and technology, has changed the face of this. And we decided we were going to retool this. And working with our city attorney's office, working with the AMBER program, we started looking at our problems there. And, you know, and I look at problems as challenges and opportunities. And we decided that we were going to change the way that we go at this, because we saw it change within the city of Dallas, and to go after this on an internet level or technology level. And I'd like to add one more level of perpetrators here. When we talked about victims, we talked about the buyers, we talked about the pimps, but I think there's a new one. And that is those organizations that provide a platform for this to occur, that provide a house for this to occur in. And they hide back there quietly. And my city attorney is saying, Byron, be very careful with your words. I will. You're here representing me, so we're good. But it's being broadcast, so. But no, these organizations hide behind a lot of laws that are not intended to protect them. And the truth of the matter is, they make a lot of money at the expense of a lot of women and children. And so, and working with some very courageous people in the city attorney's office, we decided we're going to take the fight to that. We call it brick and mortar. And brick and mortar is the citizens of Dallas. If you took all this victimization, all these buyers, all this, and if you put it in a physical building, you put it up in a window, we as a community would not stand for it for a second. We'd shut it down overnight. But you put it up in the internet, and it becomes like this thing that nobody can touch, see, or feel. So we decided we are going to claim that part of the internet as the city of Dallas, just like we patrol the streets, and this will go to the buyers, and we're going to say this is off limits. Whether you're a trafficker, and I put buyers in the trafficker category too, you're a quote pimp, you're a buyer, if you're going to engage in this activity, we will hold you accountable like we do anybody else engaged in a criminal activity. And I think that word criminal activity is important, because we talk about trafficking victims, we see them as victims. We talk about pimps, we see them as perpetrators. We hear the word buyers, and it's real easy to steal your word, but people want to say boys will be boys. Victimization is victimization. Those people who take advantage of people are criminals, and they need to be held accountable. And not that all criminals can't be rehabilitated, but you first got to be told that your conduct's wrong, and that communicated to you loudly. And and I think and one of the things working through SMU under civil rights, what I've learned is that police officers are the front line, the duty bearers of human rights. We have to communicate that. And so that's what we've done in our program. And it's a program, again, that's comprehensive now, and I'm glad to say we don't have ending, because we still have much more to learn on buyers. The first time, once we change it to an internet-based, we still do street level. The first time we did our John sting on this, I was surprised, I'll be honest with you. I thought we'd grab 5, 10. We made 42 arrests in one night. And the only reason we didn't make any more, we didn't have enough cops. I did not realize it would be so much. And now we've taken that, and see, the idea was to, and I think this is important, we have to develop, and again, this, this is what you have to use all our people through OJJDP, through our community, through SMU, through AMBER program, to really leverage resources, and we have to develop programs that are, one, sustainable, two, that leverage resources, and you talked about it, because it is extremely costly. How can we do this in a cost-effective manner that's resource sensitive, and it's resource sensitive that allows us to do this day in and day out like we do everything else. And that's what we've been working towards, and I think we have achieved that now, to do this in a manner that we can utilize the minimum amount of resources to get the highest return. And now our next stage that we move to, because we do our John Sting, we do our victim recovery, our John Sting, and now we're moving to a more specific, those people that have clearly indicated they're specifically interested in children, whether it be a pimp or whether it be a John. Because we do have some Johns that show a definite interest in young children, and we want to hold them even more accountable across the board.
Thank you. Thank you. May I pick up on just a couple of words? When you said comprehensive, I realized, I don't know if I made the point, that when we approach this problem, it's very important to do it from the supply and the distribution and the demand perspective. We found that the demand part was missing, and so that's why we came in and focused explicitly on demand. But we're trying to encourage organizations that are doing 100% of rescuing to even do 5% on the demand side, so that it's comprehensive in the other way of including the demand. It's extremely important that people who are working on demand are thinking comprehensively about the supply. Now, one of the ways that you do it, back to your question about sustainability, has to do with the level of fines that you have. Because Massachusetts, it was for first offense between $100 and $500. We worked very hard on new legislation. It's now $1,000 to $5,000 for first offense. That makes a difference. Colorado passed state legislation that is $1,000 at least. Is it mandatory, Lena? $1,000? No, but what is it? It's allows, well, up to $5,000. I have it wrong. Okay, it's up to $5,000. Now, they need to get their municipal ordinances up, right? Or start charging at the state level. But we have among us Dan Steele from the Denver police who says, well, we're picking up 250 guys a year. So let's say that's $250,000 to $500,000. That counts, particularly if you put a chunk of it into the victim's restoration, the survivor restoration, and you take another chunk and put it in to adding more by squad for you, because then it becomes this virtuous circle where the more you pick up, the more police there are to pick up more, etc., until the word gets out, and it's word of mouth, but it's also sometimes, I don't like the names and the pictures actually being published, because there's so much what we call collateral damage with the children. So I think I won't go there. But anyway, word does get out. There's wonderful, will you tell about the billboard, what the billboard says in Chicago? I love that one.
We have two billboards, and one either east and west, north and south. The commander and sergeant always have to remind me. I can't remember. It's on Manheim Road in Leiden Township, and there was a partnership. The collaboration is always necessary. One of them is saying that you never know if the person that you're trying to pick up right now could work for us. So basically she could be an undercover officer. And then on the other side, it's telling you the cost in terms of the maximum cost, which includes the maximum fines and penalties and tow fees of $2,150. Now that's the maximum. That's assuming that they've been picked up more than one time. That's including the tow fees and potential storage fees. It's the basic cost is $1,175, $500 for the first offense fine and $500 for the tow, and $500 for the, what is it, Commander? $500 for the fine, $500 for the tow?
$500 for the car and $170 for the tow.
Thank you. So, and then we've been doing pretty well because, quote unquote, we have zero recidivism statistically. We already know, and we'll talk about that more later, that they just move to the next jurisdiction. That's one of the reasons we provide technical assistance.
to the next jurisdiction. Yes. Right. Now, we keep talking about just a lot of things that I wanted to drop a few facts in here. First of all, that billboard, you said it awfully innocuously. I mean, it's this fabulous billboard, and it says, you come here to buy sex, it'll cost you $2,150. We're teaming up to bust you. That has a different tone to it.
That is an important part.
Yeah,
the teaming up, yes.
And then the tow part. Now, obviously, that's a great way to get some money into the system, etc. You can keep the car forever, or you can just keep it for a month. He has to go home and explain what happened to the car. You know, like, is it really in the shop, or what? It's in a shop, I guess. But the interesting thing about that, to me, is we did some research on 100 guys who were willing to tell us that they were buyers, and we asked them, well, what would deter you? And we gave them a lot of choices. 70-something% of them, 71% of them said if their car was going to be impounded, they would stop buying. Oh my gosh, can you imagine? Guys, what's with the car? You know, I know you like to go out there and wax your car, and you know, you're very proud of talking about your car. I mean, seriously, there is, isn't that amazing? 71, now, that's, you know, maybe they overreported, maybe it's really 65, maybe it's 85, but still, can you imagine saying that many people? Obviously, though, they have to be arrested or charged before it works. So it has to be known that your car is going to be impounded for this to work.
Do you want to tell them what the money goes to?
Well, you can decide where the money's going to go. Right? I mean, that's what I was saying earlier. That you can decide if the extent that it goes to restoration. The main thing is don't let it just go back into the state coffers to be sort of circulated. You know, make it really directed, and that's how you get to this holistic approach. May I now move on to Laura? Okay, Laura, this is really a good segue where I'm talking about guys. You've worked, I guess you know this, she has worked on gender inequality for years in 3 different places. I mean, Latin America, Europe, the US. So I think that's very important to have seen from different cultures. And she's now up at the University of Chicago in the sociologist world. And she has done a report, which she's going to tell us about, I hope, a report on thousands of men who are purchasing sex. And she did that with the Chicago Alliance Against Sexual Exploitation, which is an outstanding example of collaborations. The power here in Dallas and in many other communities is when you get collaborations. You get the police working with the churches, working with the universities, etc., and coming up with this common goal, a common agenda. Everyone doesn't have to do the same part. In fact, it's stronger if people are doing parts, but you need to understand which part you're doing within a whole picture so that you're not overlapping or so there's not a gap. And that's very important. So please tell us about your work, and I love it. And how, by the way, what year? Because I didn't have, like...
It was just released this past January, but
Okay.
it's analyzing data from 2000, mainly from 2010.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Thank you for having me here. I'm very pleased to be here. And I wanted to start off by sharing that every 5 minutes, people are accessing information from over 1,500 forums on the USA Sex Guide, which is a high-volume website for men who purchase sex. So right now, as we're sitting here in this symposium, there are approximately 800 to 1,700 men who are on this website, the USA Sex Guide, perusing the posts, talking about the sex that they've bought and the sex that they hope to buy. So the report that I did is specifically looking at the exchange of information among men who purchase sex in Illinois regarding what they call their great hobby, purchasing sex. part of what this does, it offers a unique glimpse into the world of a population that remains hidden and often inaccessible to researchers. It also provides insight into what has been mentioned, the increasingly important role of the internet in the facilitation of commercial sexual exploitation. I have the report with me here because I want to share with you some direct quotations from Johns, because I think nobody can speak better about Johns than Johns themselves, than the purchasers. So I wanted to start by giving kind of an overview of kind of what we learned from this website about men who purchase sex. One of the things that was evident, as has been mentioned before, is that they do come from all walks of life. I mean, we were studying specifically internet literate men who purchase sex, but they self-identified many times as having families. Some of them didn't, many of them did. They seem to come from all walks of life. They're extremely geographically mobile, which is why it's so important to connect and demand efforts across communities, because if they see that there's a consequence in one community but not another, they'll move over to another community. One of the most exciting findings is that at the same time that these changes were coming about in Cook County and throughout the state of Illinois as a result of Marianne's work and others' work, starting to arrest Johns in higher levels, there was this shift that happened on the website where men, they use this website, it's a brotherhood for them, it's a training ground, it puts them instantly up to speed. If you've never bought sex before in your life, you go to this website and within half an hour you know all of the ins and outs. And all of a sudden the Johns, who discuss law enforcement quite frequently because they want to know what the potential consequences are, they're suddenly talking about, wait, there's a reverse sting happening in this neighborhood where I was previously purchasing. So Johns, what we discovered, they are highly educated, at least this segment, about any efforts to curb what they call their hobby or their great adventure, purchasing sex. And so when they see that men are being arrested, they talk about it energetically, and it prompts them to reconsider their participation in the commercial sex industry, with many of them stating that they will discontinue purchasing altogether. Conversely, when they see women being arrested, that does not deter them. They simply report that they'll go to a different street corner, they'll go to a different website to pick up those women. So I just wanted to share just a couple of quotations from the Johns themselves about the deterrent efforts that work, arresting Johns and sort of this impact. I want to start off by, this is a user who's posting in Rockford, a different city outside of Chicago, outside of Cook County, kind of talking about like, hey, Johns here in Rockford. So he says, be thankful they're trying to clean up the streets the old-fashioned way by getting the streetwalkers off or the sex workers off. The Cook County Sheriff's Police, headed by Tom Dart, is piloting a program they hope brings them national notoriety. It's called Get Rid of Demand and is focused on putting away the mongers or the purchasers. The simple fact is they make more money by impounding a monger's vehicle than sending a streetwalker to court that will be out the next day. They're also getting some funding from some women's group which thinks that it's going to help the streetwalker, which is BS. It will stop the demand for a while, and then when things blow over in a few months, it will be business as usual again. Okay, I want to point out that is 2009. So later, we have some posts that are from 2010, 2011. So when these changes start happening, the guys are like, oh, just, wait a few months. It's an election year. Things are going to blow over. But they start to see that, no, the arrests are still happening. Johns are still being held accountable. So one says, this is a Chicago Escorts report forum, I think we all need to say goodbye to this hobby or get ready for felony charges, which also means loss of job for professionals. Another one on a Chicago Backpage forum, it's a guy who just narrowly escaped being arrested. He says, I can't help but feel I really dodged a bullet that day. I'm sure my days of taking those kinds of chances are over. I've been too lucky for too long. It's time for me to reconsider my level of involvement in the hobby also. Another one in 2011, I can't believe all the busts. I thought this would calm down after the November elections, but it has not. Stay safe. And I just want to end my little section by sharing a quotation from a John who was personally busted, because a lot of the discussion on these forums is just a John hearing about another John getting arrested is enough to make him reconsider his own involvement. But here's a post from a John who was busted himself. He says, "Well, boys, after 20 plus years being in this hobby, it has finally come to an end. I was busted in Chicago. That's all I will say for now regarding the bust. I will say I am out," all caps. "But I need to get my record cleaned. Can you please pass on to me any attorneys that can get me expunged?" Is that the word from this? "I talked to one already, but he said it will be in the thousands of dollars to clear me. Damn, if I had that kind of money, I would be with escorts. Please help." "Also, if you were busted, can you text me back and tell me what happened? I can swap stories with you. Thanks, USA Sex Guide community, for all these years of help." So that was the big takeaway from this report, in addition to other things that we learned about Johns and what motivates them to purchase, is just this, it seems like a pretty simple finding that arresting Johns, holding Johns accountable seems to work. At the very least, making them reconsider purchasing, with many saying that they will stop purchasing altogether.
It's important to note, though,
very interesting.
I just want to say that in terms of the importance of the timeline, the sheriff organized the human trafficking response team and intensified his efforts to go after the John specifically in February 2009.
Yeah, right. This really is linked. Gosh, that's gratifying. Are you all feeling energized? Like not hopeless about this? Good. Same here. Oh, you all should see, if you go on the Demand Abolition site and look at what the guys said about what would deter them, it is so interesting. The percentage who said that if their employer found out, it's like, I don't know, it's up in the 80%, you know, it's in the 80s. And that's even without zero tolerance policies from employers, which there ought to be, by the way. And then the percentage who said, like, they would stop if a family member was going to find out. It was something like, I don't know, something like 88%. I mean, just tell them you're going to call their mama. You know, seriously. And they know that their marriages are going to be in real trouble. But you have to pick them up to do that. Now, in Sweden, this is pretty cool. After the police pick up the guy, they send a letter home to say, here's your court date, etc. And it has return address by squad. So he's rushing home every day to get the mail before she does. Yeah. I had heard that someplace was doing postcards. Is that true? That one, if you aren't, you should. You know, that's a great idea. Okay. Robert Benz is co-founder of the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, which is based in Atlanta. And what I particularly note from you is your work with students, educating students on this subject and empowering them to take action. Now, there are all of these neat sounding initiatives in here. They're so good I have to read them. One is the Frederick Douglass Dialogues Tour. Another is the Abolition Day Project, 100 Days to Freedom, and a curriculum that you've developed, History, Human Rights, and the Power of One. Will you talk to us about how you're working with kids?
Sure. I was going to say, we're talking about demand, and one of the big benefits to ending demand, at least for men, is that Swanee Hunt won't look at you while she's describing Johns who wax their cars. I always feel guilty by association in this business. Yeah, she looked at Byron too.
Look, you just look like a car waxer.
Actually, I'm not a car waxer.
Can everyone hear, Robert, where you are? Okay, good.
You know, I'm being asked to talk about prevention education, which I would highly recommend using those two words to any nonprofit organizations who want to make funders run for the hills. They're the anti-trafficking equivalent to great personality in blind dating. You know, I have been doing this for a few years, and it's such a complicated issue, human trafficking, and it's made purposely more complicated by the people who practice it. And so I tend to use a lot of analogies. I'm big on analogies, and being here in Dallas, I'd like to use one with the oil industry if I could. 3 years ago, we were all very worried about the explosion of the oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico. And we looked at it from different points of view. One, the oil slicks, those poor fishermen are going to be out of business. The beaches, you know, the people who own the resorts are going to be out of business. Those poor fish and wildlife, they're all covered in oil. And how do you prioritize that? And what British Petroleum, to their credit, what they did was they allowed us to look beneath the surface, which also happens to be a tagline for Health and Human Services for human trafficking. They gave us a look at the bottom of the ocean floor, and when they turned that camera on that well where oil was gushing out of it, we all knew exactly what the priority was. There was no doubt you have to cap that well, otherwise, I mean, where would we be today if we didn't see that well? There'd be oil all over the world from that until it ended. And I've spent the last many years of my life dedicated to the issue of prevention education, and only because I believe that it's a priority. And prevention education as it relates to demand. How do we finally put an end to the demand so that it makes it easier to respond to the issue? And I thought, well, where we have to start is with young people. Frederick Douglass has a famous quote that says, "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." And this is something that, you know, we base our, everything we do on Frederick Douglass, and what would Frederick Douglass do? It's easy to do that because he was a genius. What we do is we create programs in schools. Right now we're working on a program with New York City Public Schools to go into the schools, and of course when we talk about demand, we're mostly talking about men. And we present these kids, we try to frame this issue in a way that they'll understand, and we utilize history to do that. So we'll create an historical parallel to the issue that we're going to discuss about contemporary slavery. And that way, kids are able to look at it from an arm's length and say, wow, now I really understand what you're talking about when you say sex trafficking or human trafficking. It's a whole lot like what slavery used to look like and what slavery's looked like for thousands and thousands of years. Slavery has only made a couple of, they juke and jive a little bit to either get around new laws or whatever it may be, but I believe, and I sincerely believe this, and people will laugh, just like they laugh when you say, we can end demand, we can stop men from soliciting women and girls. I believe that we can change the path and stop the path of slavery, which has moved forward for thousands of years, by educating young people. I don't think anyone's ever stopped and gone and said, okay, let's start here. This is our next generation of leaders. So when we're talking to boys in the classroom, they're still, their identities are still being formed. They're not the men who are soliciting women as yet. They're still boys and young men who are going to make those decisions to not do that. And when we discuss this and help them understand what this is really about, because this again is what history has presented a fuzzy picture of all of this for us, and it's hard to understand it, and it's purposely devised to confuse us. But if it's so easy to tell them the truth, because then it makes so much sense. You know, they understand what's going on, and they're going to be the ones who make the right decisions on how they treat girls and women in the future, and how they live their lives as people who are not contributing to exploitation. And if you ask men, we were discussing Lawrence Taylor today, and Lawrence Taylor said, I didn't know what I was, I didn't know that. This is something that he got off with for the most part. So ignorance was an excuse for him, and it can't be said for everybody. But we're going to make sure that when we get to boys that are still in middle school and high school, before they've made those mistakes, before they've made decisions to go in that direction, we're gonna help them make the right decisions.
You know, it's so interesting because a piece of that information, guys don't even know it's illegal. And I talk to women all over who don't realize that buying a woman or a child, of course a child, that's statutory rape, right? That's usually a felony, or everywhere a felony. But for a guy to buy a woman who says, I want to sell, that's actually illegal. And it has nothing to do with crossing borders or anything. I mean, you can just go in upstairs, and if there's someone there who is, let's say, selling, it's illegal for you, sir, to go upstairs and buy her. And Sergeant here is going to arrest you for that. It's not just a casual thing. So guys need to know that. The other thing is the girls need to know that. You know, it's the boys, but it's also the girls. And I don't mean just to protect them from becoming victims. I mean because of their influence on the boys, too. But I think about what you're saying about the slavery question. Mm-hmm. And what we know about slavery in the United States is that, in fact, it was a very, very, very contentious issue about, I mean, a lot of us saw Lincoln, right, recently, the movie, and you saw how contentious it was about whether or not to do away with slavery. Well, there were slaves, actually, who said, this is working for me. I know where my next meal is coming from. I've been treated very lovingly. My children have been educated by the master's family, with his kids. They came, I actually know a family where guys went to Harvard and then came back and they would educate the slave children in the household. And it had been working for several generations for them. So they said, how about you don't mess with what's working for me? And Abraham Lincoln and other abolitionists said, I'm happy for you, but we're not going to be a country where some people own other people. We're just not going to do it. We're not going to set our policy to protect how well it's going for a very few people. We have to set our public policy to protect the harm that it is doing. In fact, in this case, to a great majority.
We had the benefit of, Abraham Lincoln had the benefit of signing a document. Congress had the benefit of passing a couple of laws to help us wash our hands of that multi-century problem that we had, that little problem that we had. But we also know, if anyone's ever read a book called Slavery by Another Name, it's a great book that talks about how slavery basically continued soon after 1865 in the South, and slavery again has continued ever since. I worry, frankly, that we have this new issue called human trafficking, that we're all forming a posse, and we're trying to get everyone's attention right now and say, come on, we got to get this. Let's get that human trafficking, and then at some point, something will happen that looks like we made progress, and we'll say, we can go home. Let's go home. And yet that that line of slavery will continue just like it's continued. But I really believe that it's education that's the key to this, and that we begin to change the paradigm. That paradigm that made some slaves say, hey, this was pretty good, has been changed completely. That's been erased.
That's right. That's right. You don't hear African Americans or whites longing for the time when. You're exactly right. Yeah. By the way, in terms of education, the Swedes and now others in what we call the Nordic model, because it started with the Swedes and then the Norwegians. The Swedes started their education as they were doing the arrests. At the same time, they started going into the primary schools and teaching about respect and equality of all. I mean, they were teaching little ones. And so to your work on gender inequality and why we as Swedes would not be a country where people think they can buy other people. And the research now is that if you ask Swedish older boys, like 18, 19-year-olds, young men, have you ever bought, would you ever buy, there's about 11% who say that they could imagine buying. Over just nearby in the Netherlands, where it has been legalized, it's about 80% who say that. And they have such a huge problem now that the mayor of Amsterdam has shut down about half of the red light district because the legal attracts the illegal. Because the legal selling and buying, when guys go to buy, and that's where they go because they're not going to be arrested, they don't walk up to a woman and say, by the way, are you legal or not? They walk up and say, how much? You know? And so the trafficking issue, we have to get out of our heads that this is about women and girls who are brought across borders. You know, this is about, yes, those, and we know that in Texas, for example, there's a tremendous problem with people from with women from Latin America being smuggled across, etc. But it's also the most vulnerable in our society here. Right? Now, we're going to take, I think we have time now for maybe 20 minutes discussion, 10 minutes discussion among us here, and then another 10 as we hear from you all in the audience, your thoughts, and then we will close. I'm just checking. At what time do we? 10 minutes total. Got it. Okay, we're going to do 4 minutes discussion right here. We're going to do 3 minutes from you all, a couple of questions, because I want Felicia to have the last word here. Okay. Well, just so we've done some informal discussing, but really, what do you want to pick up on that any of you has said?
Well, I'd like to just really quickly, I really want to introduce my Commander Michael Anton and Sergeant William Lean, our Special Operations Advice Unit from the Cook County Sheriff's Office, because they are the ones that risk life and limb. I'm behind a computer and telephones and all, but that's my, my team leaders over there. So I just was very, very pleased that they could make it.
What is the website? What's the website where we can find out more about what y'all are doing?
The website that we're working on now, you mean?
No, I don't know.
Oh, well, right now you can't find out a whole lot because we're actually building that link that will have Demand Abolition on it as well, but that was a surprise. She messed it up.
Okay.
You weren't supposed to know.
No, I'd actually kind of take a little bit of what everybody said, because I think that when we talk about that comprehensive approach, because I don't think any one group, any one organization can solve this problem, and it's an enormous problem. But what I do know, and if I only look at my own organization, because when we started this, people don't like when I say this, but we had resistance, and I don't say it in a negative way, because it's a resistance, and I mean this word in a positive way. It's resistance of ignorance, of a lack of understanding. But then I watched a chief come in and order every single officer in Dallas Police want to be trained in all of this. And you're talking about a good old boy network. Let's get right down to it. And I didn't know how it was going to go over, and they got it. They got it. And these officers understand, some of them literally in tears. And so I watch it work there, and so I know this can work at a department level, a community level, a state level, and a country level. And my point of that is no one organization can handle this, but we have to leverage resources. It starts in the schools. You got to operate from two ends. You start the education. I'm in the retribution business. Okay, so I'm going to start the other end. Okay? No, because we got to let people know this is a crime and you will be held accountable. And the two will meet in the middle. And I believe as a country, and I love the way you said that, they got to sign a piece of paper. Well, we need to establish our own piece of paper, and we do it across the board. And one more part there, I think we really have to take this fight to the internet. And that's what we're trying to do is by placing ads. We place ads that tell people, some of them are fake ads, and when you open the ad, you see the police department badge, and it says, had this been an officer, you would have been arrested. And we want to apply fear. And I'll give you one real quick story there. One particular guy, the first time we did it, we put it up. 2 months later, we did it again. We arrested this man as a John, and show you how it works. He said, hey, did y'all put an ad up here a couple months ago? I said, well, maybe. He said, well, because I was on there and I saw this badge pop up, and I didn't get on for 2 months. And I got on tonight and I got arrested. I said, we're out there every day, bud. Tell all your friends. So.
Lauren, do you want to say something?
Well, I just wanted to emphasize something that's come up in our discussions is just from spending 2 years immersed in these networks, I didn't share as much about kind of their attitudes, and they are a diverse group and express diverse opinions, but the fact is they describe witnessing violent acts against prostituted people and still purchasing sex with that person, and they describe when those women do not fulfill the fantasy that they have purchased, that they believe that they have purchased, they respond by reasserting their right to dominate and control prostituted people. And so, sometimes it's easy to talk about, well, they were just out and they just picked up some person, but when you actually talk about the way that the commercial sex industry operates, I mean, it is a vicious industry that does contain a lot of harm, and one of the things that we found in this study was that harm is throughout communities. For example, in Illinois, it was throughout communities in Illinois, rural towns as well as larger cities. So I think it's good to just keep that in mind, that it is real harm, but it's perpetrated by everyday people. They're not always monsters. There's, as you mentioned, there's a percentage that certainly are, but that's why it's so important to get to young men and women early on through prevention and education.
You know what? I just thought about what you were talking about. I'm so sorry, Swanee. Actually, our Human Trafficking Response Team model is a report that you could find at the DePaul Schiller DeCanto law website link. It shows how it's not a research piece, it's a report on what our model looks like, and we are actually funded by Demand Abolition to replicate that human trafficking response team model in a number of areas throughout the country. So I was joking because we are developing on the sheriff's website a whole link with all of the efforts that are taking place for human trafficking, specifically to Demand, and that will be coming out in the next 6 months.
Mm-hmm. And we haven't, by the way, we're not going to do the audience part, just so that you know. You'll have to come up to us afterwards and talk to us individually. But we haven't even mentioned John schools, where guys who are picked up, it can be instead of being charged or instead of paying a fine or in addition to or whatever. It can be structured lots of ways. They go and they spend 1 or 2 days and they hear from the cops saying, we're going to pick you up. They hear from the public health saying you're going to get horrible diseases. They hear from Marianne or other survivors saying, let me tell you what my life was like when I was 6 and when I was 12 and when I was 18. And no, I didn't like having sex with you. And the recidivism drops compared to a control group by 40% just from that 1 or 2 days that the guys pay for themselves. So you talk about a sustainable model if it's implemented right. The reason I want to stop is because we have here a graduate of Dallas Baptist University, who is the mother of 2 boys, and their names are Isaiah and Elijah. She is a mentor to incarcerated women at the Dawson State Jail here in Dallas. And she is a survivor leader with New Friends, New Life through their leadership circle. And of course, I'm talking about Felicia Hyde. Felicia, would you come in?
I am very excited to go to war with all you guys, and I'm so proud of y'all. It's so awesome just to hear just what everybody's doing. As a single mother of 2 sons, I am raising them to be the kind of men that value the dignity and humanity of all people. Of particular concern to me is that my sons learn how to treat women and girls, persons who I believe are the most oppressed in our culture and the most vulnerable to prostitution and other forms of human trafficking. I'm raising them with an expectation that it is possible to live in a world where human beings are not bought and sold. So you may ask, Felicia, how are you going to do that? How are you raising sons with the goal of a world that doesn't treat human beings as transactions? Well, here's how. It all begins with education and awareness, as what you had said. And I teach them to see women and girls as equals, along with sharing my own personal story with my boys, and they've seen my hurt and my pain. So they have probably an extra sense of compassion, and that's a good thing. And this also means that they are learning that women are not to be used for anything, that women are not less than them, that women are not subservient, that they're not to be used for their own pleasure, sexual or otherwise, and that women are not commodities. God made male and female with an intrinsic worth and value. My sons are also learning to critique the cultural images of women and girls that bombard mainstream media, even their cartoons. And that participating in any kind of conduct belittling women diminishes their own honor. I am teaching my sons to be protectors rather than predators of women. You see, I know something about predators. I was raised in a family where I was objectified, abused, and silenced. Money and things were used to keep me quiet about the sexual abuse I suffered as a child. I was groomed to choose a path in life where my sexuality could be used to buy food, pay my rent, and anything else I needed. All I had to do was expose a little bit of cleavage, wear a little on the bottom. It wasn't long before my life denigrated into dancing in strip clubs and prostitution. You know, they say that sexual abuse is the gateway to prostitution. Many people think that's a myth. I hear it being kind of thrown around, but it is the truth. I'm a witness to that fact. When I was finally able to walk away from that horrible way of living, I was damaged on the inside. I had no dignity. I really believed I had no value and that all I was good for was sex. In fact, I would probably introduce myself with my sexuality first, because I didn't know anything else. I didn't even know what the word dignity meant. But I wanted better. Then someone led me to New Friends, New Life, which is an organization that helped me discover my real identity. It has taken me 7 years of therapy and support groups to heal and become the woman I was always meant to be. I'm not my breasts, I'm not my hips, I'm not my thighs, or even my vagina. I am a woman, fearfully and wonderfully made. Thank you for this opportunity. It has been my honor to have shared with you this afternoon. Thank you.